is Austin Johnson. This is my speech, Legalizing Suicide. If it is considered cruel to keep an animal that is on the brink of natural death and in pain alive when you have the option to put them down, how is it humane that people do not have the same option for their dying loved ones or themselves? Physician-assisted suicide is a growing topic in the United States. Physician-assisted suicide has been legalized in 9 states across the U.S., but there is no good reason as to why it should not be legalized nationally. If physician-assisted suicide is legal in the capital city of the United States, Washington, D.C., it should be legal everywhere. Although there are many arguments regarding the ethics of human euthanasia, there is nothing more ethical than allowing someone to die on their own terms, peacefully, while relieving their suffering. The movement to legalize human euthanasia has gained quite a bit of traction over the past few years. Human euthanasia has been legalized in 9 states across the U.S., which is just over half as many states as recreational marijuana use has been legalized in. Even before the legislation of physician-assisted suicide in some states, people were traveling outside the U.S. to other countries like Switzerland where it is legal, and they offer the service to tourists as well. Swiss researchers found that out of approximately 600 cases of assisted suicide in Switzerland, around 150 to 200 of them were people from foreign countries, Beck. It is so common that the Swiss organizations that assist in euthanasia refer to the people that travel to Switzerland just for this service as suicide tourists. If people are willing to travel thousands of miles just to be relieved of their pain and suffering, it should be made easier for them and just being legalized in the United States nationally. In the case of assisted suicide, it should be made clear that people who support it only support it under specific circumstances. Human euthanasia is a broader definition that can include many different courses of action. Assisted suicide can be used in place of euthanasia. Assisted suicide is exactly what it sounds like. It is when someone desires to end their life and they ask to be or are assisted in their efforts. In countries where physician-assisted suicide is legal, there are multiple reasons why patients choose to end their lives. In an article covering some of the research findings of physician-assisted suicide, the authors found that, quote, the dominant motives of physician-assisted suicide are loss of autonomy and dignity and being less able to enjoy life's activities, end quote, McGee. People feel this way because it gets to a point in life where the quality of life just isn't enjoyable anymore. And they would like to die now rather than draw out the pain and suffering and continue living months in pain and come to the same end result. For forms of assisted suicide such as the ones aforementioned are understandable. People have a right to life and death, and the government should not be able to have laws in place that alienate those rights. There are some cases in which human euthanasia is morally wrong. If the United States were to pass a law that allowed human euthanasia and was not specific about who makes the decision, it could become a serious problem. If in that hypothetical situation the family were able to make the decision about euthanizing the patient, it could create a loophole that would allow people to misuse and abuse the law. Someone could abuse the law by euthanizing their parent or spouse solely to reap the inheritance benefits. In a case such as the latter, it would be unacceptable to euthanize the patient. The only time the family should be able to have a loved one euthanized would be if the patient were not in a state they could make the official decision themselves and the family provided evidence that it was the own patient's desire to be euthanized. Other than that, legal human euthanasia should only include physician-assisted suicide. Others consider all forms of human euthanasia morally wrong because they believe in the, quote, slippery slope, end quote, argument. The slippery slope argument says that if physician-assisted suicide is made legal, then more and more increasingly morally wrong things will be legalized next, eventually allowing euthanasia for no reason, Smith. In A Legal Right to Die, responding to the slippery slope and abuse arguments, the author says that if assisted suicide is legalized, it will be very limited at first and only allow cases that match the specific criteria required, and then it would slowly become more permissive and people would begin to realize if the first step is acceptable, then the following steps are too. Benatar. This means that technically their argument is correct, but it is invalid because it does not ultimately explain why assisted suicide should not be legalized. The argument is also invalid because if somebody wants to commit suicide badly enough, if they have the resources and ability to do it, they will. There are many alternatives either way, so it is best if it is just made legal so that it can be regulated and done by a professional. There is also something called a DNAR order, which is an order from a patient that says if they are to stop breathing, that you do not attempt resuscitation. If people are allowed to specifically order not to bring them back to life, then there is no reason people cannot be allowed to order euthanasia or assisted suicide. Human euthanasia must be legalized in the United States nationally because people have a right to die, and they need the right to decide when. Despite arguments against the ethics of physician-assisted suicide, people ought to be given the right to decide, just the same as people are given the right to decide to a DNA order. It is more unethical to tell someone that they must live out the rest of their days suffering and completely incapable of taking care of themselves than it is to allow someone to avoid all that and die on their own terms with the aid of a professional. Thank you.